Hey guys, tonight we slip into a world where footsteps echo off cold stone, and names are whispered instead of spoken. Picture a frozen horizon stretching past reason, where iron bars don't just keep men in, they keep the rest of the world out. Tonight, we meet the kind of man who doesn't need to raise his voice to silence a room. A man whose quiet made the air heavier. You probably won't survive this world if you can't hear what isn't said. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to know what corner of the night you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The cold out here doesn't bite, it burrows. The year is 1987, and somewhere in Siberia, deep behind a wall of snow and silence, Viktor Averin wakes up with frost clinging to his lashes. The prison camp isn't marked on any cheerful map. It's one of many ghost-like facilities still operated under the Soviet system's last wheezing breath. He's only 23. Already, he looks older than he should, not because of the years, but because of what they held. Hunger, fists, orders barked without meaning, and the sharp, invisible border between predator and prey. The camp doesn't run on guards alone. It runs on hierarchy. And the real laws here? They're not written in any book. They're tattooed on skin, whispered across bunks, and enforced in the dead of night. This is where Viktor learns the rhythm of survival, not by strength, not by charm, but by stillness. When a man moves too fast in a place like this, someone gets nervous, and nervous men in prison, they make corpses. Viktor watches, always from the edge. He isn't the loudest, but somehow, people give him space. Not out of fear, at least not at first. It's something else. That kind of hush that follows when everyone senses they're standing near something serious. Many people still think that the collapse of the Soviet Union killed off the old thief traditions. That once the gulags closed, the code of the Vory died with them. But what if it was places like this that preserved that code, hardened it, passed it from cell to cell like a sacred curse? So, what do you think? Were those bitter camps graveyards of culture, or dark, frozen forges where new legends were cast? Viktor isn't a born leader. Not the kind who kicks down doors or draws knives for fun. He keeps his words folded up tight, like a secret banknote. He learns to play chess without a board, and to read people by the way they breathe under pressure. The men who survive in here either become wolves, or they become invisible. Viktor manages to be both. His nickname starts small, just a whisper passed by a tattooed arm in the canteen. The Quiet One. Later, Patriarch. Not because he's old, but because he carries something older than all of them. Stillness with weight. His silence starts commanding decisions. Who eats? Who gets moved to which barrack? Who gets left alone? All without him saying a word. There's an old story that floats through the camp in winter. No one remembers who started it. That once, when a guard barked orders at a row of men and raised his voice at Viktor, the others stepped back without thinking. The guard paused, said nothing, and moved on. That's the kind of quiet we're talking about. Do you remember the day he left with the first money? It wasn't much. A folded ruble note, slipped from a bunkmate before release. A gesture, maybe a thank you, maybe a tribute. Viktor didn't ask. He just took it, nodded once, and walked out into a dawn that didn't care he existed. But the underworld? It remembered, the world outside the prison walls isn't warm. It's just a different kind of cold. Viktor Averin steps into freedom like someone walking onto thin ice. He doesn't run. He doesn't look back. He walks like he never left, as if the barbed wire was just a hallway and the camp a long, silent room. His first stop isn't some grand reunion or tearful family meal. It's a nameless apartment in a gray building, one of 100 stacked like shoeboxes in Moscow's outskirts. He's there to meet a man with no real name, just a title, a vor, a thief-in-law, one of the old guard, a man who can look at the ink on Viktor's skin and know exactly who he is, and more importantly, what he isn't. There are no handshakes, no introductions, just tea that neither of them drinks, and a long, quiet look that speaks in centuries. Then the question, "Are you still bound?" Viktor nods. That's it. That's his re-entry interview into the Vory v. Zakone, the elite criminal caste that rules the underworld with a code older than the country itself. In the 1930s, that code was born out of gulags and war, a rigid doctrine that outlawed working with the state, getting married, or holding a real job. It demanded full devotion, brotherhood, silence. Everything else came second. Viktor doesn't speak unless it's necessary. That makes him valuable. Talkers are everywhere in post-Soviet Russia. Guys trying to sell, to scream, to steal the last bits of order. But someone who moves through chaos without noise, that man becomes a lighthouse. He doesn't need to throw fists to command space. His calm does the work for him. In a world flooded with noise, Viktor's silence is a statement. And slowly, others begin to orbit him. Not out of fear, but out of clarity. It's easier to follow someone who doesn't waste words. You don't have to guess where you stand. If you're breathing next to Viktor, it means you haven't crossed a line yet. Many people still think that silence in crime is just a tactic, a safety measure. But those who know the Vory tradition understand it's a belief system, a language, a philosophy. So what do you think? Can a code built on silence outlast generations of change? There's a small-time crew in the city's industrial zone. They move product, mostly cigarettes and cheap electronics hijacked from Belarus. Viktor doesn't ask to join. He simply appears one day, doesn't speak, watches. Then, when their leader makes a mistake, talks too loud to the wrong customs official, it's Viktor who takes over. No ceremony. The others just step back and let him. He enforces the code without raising his voice. A man skims off a deal. He disappears for a week and returns pale, walking with a limp. No one ever says what happened. Another man gets sloppy during a run. Viktor doesn't punish him. He replaces him with someone better. That's worse. What sets Viktor apart isn't power, it's precision, and it's during this rise that the nickname sticks. The Quiet Patriarch. Not because he's old or sentimental, but because his presence feels generational, solid, like stone in a river. No one remembers the exact day they started calling him that. But once they did, no one dared stop. One evening, a junior member asks a foolish question, loudly, in front of others. Something about cutting a side deal. Viktor doesn't even turn his head. He just lifts one finger and lets it rest midair. The room goes still. The man leaves the crew the next day. No punishment, just exile. That's Viktor's power. He doesn't need to fight to win. He just has to pause. There's one older thief who watches all this unfold. He's been through wars, prison riots, betrayals. One night, he leans in and says to no one in particular, That boy's got the old silence, the kind that builds empires or ends them, and that silence would become Viktor's signature. The code is never written, never printed, never spoken aloud in full. It lives in symbols inked on skin, in glances exchanged across smoky rooms, in the decisions that ripple without explanation. For the Vory v. Zakone, the thieves in law, the code is both crown and chain. Viktor Averin wears it like a second spine. By now, his legend is forming quietly. Not from stories retold with embellishment, but from silence maintained in moments where others would break. The kind of silence that costs you teeth or time, but earns you trust. He's not the first to embrace the code, but in the 1990s, when the world around the Russian underworld is slipping into cheap glamour and noisy spectacle, Viktor becomes something rare. A reminder of the old ways. The Vory code is strict, almost absurdly so. No cooperation with the state, no holding official documents or jobs, no marrying, no family, no property. It's about shedding all attachments except loyalty to the Brotherhood. And Viktor, despite his growing influence, never flinches. He lives in a rented flat, plain, undecorated. No television, one radio. When money flows in, he passes it to others, keeps just enough for food, cigarettes, and train fare. The rest is for the collective, the tradition. You don't rise by owning more. You rise by needing less. Many people still think this kind of discipline is myth, that no one could live by such outdated rules in modern Russia. So what do you think? Could you follow a code that tells you to strip away everything that makes you feel safe? One winter night, the younger guys in his circle are arguing over a nightclub investment. It's flashy, risky, and it smells like greed. Viktor listens for a while, then finally speaks. Just one line. If the floor's glass, why are you dancing so hard? They drop the plan the next day. That's how he enforces the code. Not with threats, not with bullets, but with reminders, parables, quiet metaphors that sink like teeth. He has no wife, no children, at least not that anyone can confirm. If he ever loved, it's a secret buried deeper than any police file. There's one photo in his apartment, face down. No one ever flips it. That's the respect his silence commands. It doesn't ask, it instructs. There's an older Vor, nicknamed Black Leonid, who confronts Viktor at a gathering. Calls him too rigid. Says the code is changing, that alliances with businessmen and officials are the future. Viktor finishes his tea, stands, and leaves. By morning, 5 others have followed him, not out of rebellion, but out of belief, because to them, Viktor isn't stubborn. He's clean. He refuses bribes from police. Won't let politicians near his people. He carves a space in the underworld where the code means something again, where silence isn't just about secrecy, it's about sacredness. Some nights, he walks alone through the streets, his coat collar turned up against the wind, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning a city that feels louder than ever. Behind him, lieutenants handle disputes, settle debts, collect tributes. But Viktor? He walks with nothing in his hands and everything in his mind. His men call him Ghost, not because he vanishes, but because he never really arrives. He simply appears, already known, already obeyed, and when a young recruit once asks him what the code really means, Viktor lights a cigarette and says, "It means you lose yourself, but you keep your word." And with that, he disappears into the dark, as if the silence itself folds to make room for him. It begins, as most things do in Viktor's world, with a decision made in complete silence. No fanfare, no drawn-out meeting. Just an understanding passed between glances in a back room near the station square. It's time for him to step into something larger. Viktor has been a respected observer, an anchor of tradition. But now, even the shadows seem to lean toward him. Moscow is shifting. The Soviet rubble hasn't even settled, and already new powers crawl into the spaces left behind. Ex-KGB, rogue cops, street toughs with cell phones and too much ego. Everyone's shouting. Everyone wants a piece. Everyone thinks speed is power. Viktor does the opposite. He slows down. He starts small. A warehouse job in Smolensk. Paper goods, supposedly. He sends a wordless crew. They don't ask questions, just drive. When they arrive, the guards open the gates without checking credentials. No bribes were paid. Just one phone call was made, and Viktor's name was mentioned. Next, it's a cargo shipment rerouted from Odessa. A dry run mostly. Testing loyalty. One man pockets too much from the customs skim. Viktor doesn't lash out. He simply moves the man to a quieter job, a cold storage detail on the border of nowhere. The message is clear. You're still breathing, but only because I chose not to notice. Within months, Viktor isn't just overseeing deals. He's orchestrating movements, truck routes, document forgeries, silent partners in struggling factories. He does it all from the second floor of a repair garage that has no signage and no receptionist. His lieutenants never knock. They just wait until the door is open. One evening, two rival crews meet in a warehouse to settle a territorial dispute. Tension in the air like static before a storm. Viktor shows up late, says nothing, doesn't sit, just stands near the far window, lighting a cigarette. The room falls quiet. One of the younger men from the opposing crew tries to break the silence with a half laugh and a remark about compromise. Viktor exhales, not loudly, just enough. And that's when it happens. The man's own crew tells him to leave. Many people still think that muscle wins territory, that the loudest man in the room gets the spoils. But so what do you think? What happens when the loudest man forgets that the quiet one was already sitting at the table before the war began? Viktor's influence grows without a single front-page scandal. There are no flashy cars, no gold chains. He rides trams, wears wool coats. When asked once by a younger associate why he doesn't upgrade to a Mercedes like the others, he replies, "A man with something to prove drives fast." His base becomes known as the Quiet House, though no signs mark it. People come in with requests, smuggling routes, debt collection, manpower for protection, and they leave with orders, never quite remembering how they were given. Viktor speaks rarely, and when he does, it's usually a question. One of his most trusted enforcers, a man named Ruslan, says this: "He never tells you what to do. He asks what you think, and you say what you think he wants, and you do it. And somehow, you never feel manipulated. You feel honored." He never repeats himself. That's one of the unspoken rules. If you didn't listen the first time, you don't belong in his circle. And yet people stay, not out of fear, out of gravity. Because following Viktor Averin is like drifting into the orbit of something enormous, silent, and utterly indifferent to noise. And once you're there, you realize something terrifying. You don't want to leave. The city doesn't sleep. Not really. It twitches. It buzzes. It murmurs in the alleys. But in certain corners, off the ring roads, down long stretches of cracked concrete where the streetlights blink without promise, a strange quiet starts to spread. Not absence of sound quiet. The other kind. The kind that comes when people know someone powerful is nearby, even if they've never seen his face. This is where Viktor Averin builds his network. Slowly, invisibly. He doesn't do it with armies. He does it with 3 men, each hand-picked, each loyal, not loud. One manages transportation, just rail lines and trucks. One handles finances, cash businesses only, laundromats, kiosks, supply depots. The last, he watches, listens, reports movement from other groups, police, and any politician with too much ambition. Together, they form something sturdier than most criminal outfits of the time. Not because they're the strongest, because they're the quietest. It's the early 2000s now, and post-Soviet Russia is learning how capitalism works, violently. Every week, another small-town mayor gets bought. Another customs officer learns to look the other way. But Viktor? He doesn't deal in bribes, not directly. He offers something better. Order. If your trucking company is being shaken down by ex-cops with sidearms, Viktor's people fix it. If a port supervisor misplaces your cargo for a fee, Viktor ensures your next shipment lands untouched. You pay once, discreetly. No threats. Just a whisper that he's aware of your situation. One man, owner of a chain of textile plants, once tried to resist. Said he didn't want to be involved in that world. A week later, his shipments were held for 12 days at every checkpoint. On day 13, a new crew approached him, offered help. No need to sign anything. He agreed. His goods moved freely the next day. No one said Viktor's name, but the textile man started sending him holiday gifts every year, addressed only to the office. Many people still think power is about territory, lines drawn on maps, turf. But what if it's really about motion? So what do you think? Is power louder when it owns the street corner, or when it owns the road your truck drives down? Viktor begins to shape cities he never enters. A whisper in Novosibirsk leads to a warehouse shifting allegiance. A favor granted in Perm turns into a monthly tribute. Men carry out his orders without needing to hear them. Not because they're brainwashed, because they trust the intentions behind the silence. In one case, a mid-level gang leader in Tula challenges Viktor's people, claims he'll never answer to a ghost. For a week, nothing happens. Then 2 of his suppliers stop answering calls. A bank freezes his account for an unexplained review. A police tip-off leads to a quiet visit from tax authorities. By the end of the month, the man moves to Georgia. He was never touched, but his entire world folded, piece by piece, under pressure that never introduced itself. There's a quote attributed to Viktor, though he denies ever saying it. If a wall hears you coming, you've already lost. It becomes something of a motto for his lieutenants. They move like shadows that wear suits. They never carry weapons in public, never shout. One of them, in fact, is known for apologizing excessively, even while collecting debts. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience," he tells a man who's missed 3 payments. "But it would be unfortunate if our silence ended." The man pays by morning. Viktor's strategy isn't dominance, it's absorption. Rather than fight rivals, he lets them tire themselves out, then extends a quiet lifeline. Some resist, most accept, because his network isn't flashy, it's stable, and in a country where chaos seems to be the only reliable forecast, Viktor's calm becomes the currency of survival. He doesn't just build an empire, he builds a habit of trust, of silence, of anticipation. A web across provinces, stitched not with fear, but with reputation. And at the center of that web, a man in a plain coat sitting near a window, listening to nothing and hearing everything. Some deals are made across marble tables with cold coffee and 10-page contracts. Others are made in parking garages with flicked cigarettes and tight nods. But the ones that matter most in Viktor Averin's world, they happen in silence, in the pause between sentences, in the weight of a glance, in the exact moment someone realizes they're negotiating with someone who doesn't need anything from them. By the early 2000s, Viktor's network is vast, yet almost invisible. It stretches from the outskirts of Moscow into regional hubs like Voronezh and Yekaterinburg, where ports and railways pump goods in and out of the country like veins through a vast organism. But Viktor's genius isn't in scale. It's in the texture of his influence, not built on noise, but on weight. He never enters a meeting with more than one person. No entourages, no theatrics, just a clipboard, a quiet watch check, maybe a phrase scribbled on a cigarette carton. A rival gang leader once bragged, "I make 10 deals a week." One of Viktor's men answered simply, "He makes one. That lasts 10 years. Take the deal with the Kaliningrad Freight Syndicate. 3 brothers run it, hot-headed and loud, the kind who walk into restaurants like they own the air. But their port access is vital. Everyone expects a power play, threats, bribes, maybe even violence. Viktor, instead, invites them to a bathhouse. No bodyguards, no demands. He speaks only once. "I won't own your ships, I'll own your delays." Then he pours them tea. By week's end, they're cutting him 6% on all logistics, just to keep the waters smooth. Many people still think influence in the criminal world comes from volume. Shouting, shooting, showboating. But so what do you think? Can one well-placed whisper really buy more than 1,000 shouts? Viktor never raises his voice. But he negotiates like a surgeon. He knows exactly what the other party fears, exactly where they're tired, and exactly how much silence to let hang before he speaks. There's a governor in the Far East who's getting greedy, skimming from local ports and hiking tolls for Viktor's drivers. Others would bribe him. Some would threaten. Viktor does neither. Instead, he makes 3 calls. A month later, that governor's cousin is implicated in a procurement scandal. The cousin disappears. The governor steps down for health reasons. A new official takes his place. Quiet, cooperative, and previously unknown to anyone except Viktor's accountant. And in the entire process, Viktor says 4 words. He's not useful anymore. That's all. His men begin to adopt this rhythm too. Not all of them are quiet by nature, but they learn that talking around Viktor feels like shouting in a library. Eventually, they adjust. One of his lieutenants, Timur, starts calling Viktor's method ambient power, like background radiation. You can't see it, but you feel it. And if you ignore it too long, it'll ruin everything. There's even a joke among rival crews. If you can hear Viktor's voice, it's already too late to run. One night, a banker involved in a laundering scheme gets cold feet and threatens to go to the press. Viktor doesn't threaten him. He invites him to lunch. They sit in a small, quiet cafe near the old theater district. It's raining outside. The banker's hands shake slightly. Viktor stirs his tea. Then, finally, he says, "We're all gamblers, but only some of us know what the table is made of." The banker nods. He stays. Later, he becomes one of Viktor's most loyal financial operatives, because what Viktor offers isn't fear, it's certainty. He never needs to raise a gun or a fist. His quietness, unmoving, watchful, deliberate, does the work. It turns negotiation into prophecy. It makes people listen harder, not because they're afraid of what he'll say, but because they know they might not get a second chance to hear it. You don't survive long in the underworld without people you trust, and people who trust that you'll keep them breathing. For Viktor Averin, loyalty isn't bought. It's cultivated, like moss in dark corners. It grows slow, quiet, and deep, despite the Vory Code's ban on attachments. No wives, no family, no property. Viktor finds himself at the center of a strange, almost familial orbit. He doesn't call it a family, of course. He never calls it anything. but the way his crew behaves, the way younger men watch him with the anxious devotion of sons, it's undeniable. There's one boy, Mikhail, barely 19, full of bad choices and good instincts. He gets picked up during a cash pickup in Tver, roughed up by some freelance enforcers. Instead of retaliation, Viktor simply visits the boy's mother 2 days later, brings tea, doesn't speak much. But by the time he leaves, the message is clear. He's one of mine. The attackers, they disappear, quietly, no bodies, just gone. Word spreads. Loyalty to Viktor isn't a demand. It's a natural consequence. People want to belong to something that doesn't break when it's tested. And Viktor, by now, has become less of a boss and more of a gravitational field. You fall into orbit, and you stay. Many people still think blood is thicker than loyalty. That family is forged only in birthright. But so what do you think? Can chosen loyalty hold tighter than blood when the stakes are life and silence? There's also real family, or at least something like it. A woman, older, quiet, running a flower stall near Taganskaya Metro, who sees him every week. No one knows her name, but she greets Viktor like a nephew, gives him tulips in the spring, chrysanthemums in fall. Once, someone tries to rough her up for protection money. By morning, 3 men are found zip-tied to a lamppost with a note pinned to their chests. Not this one. Viktor never speaks of her again. But every holiday, a black car delivers a single white orchid to her stand. No return address. He has brothers, too, though again, not in name. Men like Alexei, his logistician, who once spent 4 hours convincing customs not to inspect a suspicious crate. Or Vadim, a former boxer who handles collection without ever cracking a knuckle. They all have lives outside Viktor's shadow, but somehow, their paths curve back toward him, like they're magnetized, and when one of them falters, the reaction is never public. Viktor believes in private corrections. One of his lieutenants, Roman, takes a bribe from a foreign crew. Something minor, but against the code. Instead of a beating or a bullet, Viktor invites him for tea in the same quiet cafe near the theater district. Midway through a conversation about supply routes, Viktor says, "Do you want to leave, or do you want to fix it?" Roman chooses the second option. He's demoted for 6 months. No explanation, just fewer calls, fewer meetings. And then slowly, he returns. Stronger, wiser, more careful. Because in Viktor's world, redemption exists, but only for those who can sit in silence long enough to earn it. There's a story, half true, about Viktor sitting vigil at the hospital bed of a man who once tried to betray him. The man had been beaten by someone else. Unrelated business. But Viktor arrived anyway, brought books, sat, never spoke. When asked why, he said, "Because loyalty doesn't disappear. It just gets misplaced." People remember things like that. And in a world where most bosses collect loyalty with money or fear, Viktor does it with presence. The kind that lingers long after he leaves a room. The kind that makes even traitors flinch when they hear his name. The storefronts look legitimate. There's nothing flashy, just a string of kebab stands, a few logistics offices, a dry cleaning chain, and a couple of auto repair garages that never seem particularly busy, but never close. On paper, it's all legal. The licenses are current, taxes are paid, receipts match the books. But Viktor Averin doesn't run a business empire. He runs a system, quiet, layered, and resistant to scrutiny. Every visible piece is connected to 5 invisible ones. Each storefront is a door that opens onto a hallway of side deals, silent trades, and ghost partnerships. Take the shipping firm in Nizhny Novgorod. It handles about 40 trucks a month, average loads, average routes. But every third vehicle carries more than listed. Not weapons, not drugs, just weight. Unregistered copper, bootleg pharmaceuticals, things no one thinks to weigh properly. And then there's the chain of vending machine companies. Harmless, right? Except they're rigged to cycle low-level currency through a rotation of tiny shell firms that pay invoices for companies that technically don't exist. Many people still think money laundering is about flash. Fake nightclubs, rigged casinos, suitcases full of euros. But so, what do you think? Could the cleanest crimes be hidden in the most boring corners? Viktor doesn't micromanage. He delegates. Each legal front has a manager, someone local, low profile, loyal. They're paid well, but not extravagantly. They're given rules. Don't talk. Don't improvise. Don't ever say Viktor's name. Once a man running one of the laundromats tries to get clever, overcharges a client, stirs up noise, Viktor doesn't threaten him. He simply replaces him with the man's assistant. The assistant says nothing, takes over quietly. Business doubles. That's how Viktor moves, without causing waves, just changing the current. There's an old department store in Ryazan, shuttered since the late 90s. Locals say it's cursed, that everyone who tries to reopen it fails. Then one day, it's bought, renovated, turned into a warehouse distribution hub for electronics. No grand opening, no signs. But trucks begin to arrive weekly. Packages are sorted, shipped, sold. No one knows who owns it. But a local official, when asked, just shrugs and says, "It's under protection." That's Viktor's seal of approval, invisible and absolute. He also funds a bakery, not because it's lucrative, but because he likes the bread. Every Thursday, a driver delivers 2 loaves to a certain flour vendor near Taganskaya. No charge, just routine. And while other crews brag about nightclubs and luxury condos, Viktor builds quietly, slowly, a foundation of quiet money, quiet movements, quiet control. Even his illegal ventures are subtle. There's no street dealing, no flashy muscle. Drugs, when moved, are passed through legitimate freight contracts. Counterfeit goods, disguised as surplus or warranty returns. No guns, no open violence, just margins, just movement. One accountant, formerly with a rival crew, once reviewed the books of one of Viktor's dummy firms and reportedly said, "This man launders with the precision of a cathedral architect." And perhaps that's the point. While others chase glamour, Viktor builds permanence. He doesn't invest in chaos. He invests in stillness, in operations that can run on autopilot, in networks where he's not needed daily, but felt always. At a dinner, one of his associates raises a toast to Viktor's empire. Viktor doesn't smile, doesn't lift his glass. He just says, "Empires are loud. I want something that doesn't need defense." And with that, the room goes quiet, because in his world, profit isn't about how much you make. It's about how little attention you attract while making it. Power in Russia has always been a shifting fog, sometimes official, sometimes under the table, sometimes behind a thick curtain in a government dacha. By the early 2000s, the lines between the criminal underworld and political elite are so blurred they might as well be drawn in pencil. And Viktor Averin, he doesn't redraw those lines, he erases them. He never runs for office, never shakes hands at ribbon cuttings. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, his presence begins to register in the minds of regional bureaucrats and mid-tier political players. Not as a threat, but as a constant. Like a low frequency, you stop noticing until it's gone. One deputy minister, anonymous now, buried under a fake name and a quiet pension, once said, "There are politicians you work with. There are criminals you fear." And then there's Averin. You accommodate him. It starts with permits. A municipal transport official needs funds to repave roads near a market. Budget is tight. Somehow, within days, a donation appears. Unmarked. No logo. Just an envelope. And then, just as mysteriously, Averin's trucks start getting waved through checkpoints a little faster. Viktor never asks for favors. That's his brilliance. He makes cooperation feel like initiative. One city councilor, young and eager to make a name, tries to push a zoning change that threatens one of Viktor's storage facilities. A week later, he's offered a better opportunity, an advisory position on a regional energy board with triple the pay. He takes it. The zoning change dies quietly in committee. Did Viktor orchestrate it? Probably. Did anyone say his name? Not once. Many people still think criminal influence over politics is loud, bribes, threats, compromise scandals. But so what do you think? Can real control come from simply making it easier for people to agree with you than oppose you? Viktor's political touch is featherlight. He never overreaches, never demands elections be rigged or laws rewritten. He just ensures that policies land in his favor, slowly, methodically. In one province, he funds a veterans hospital, privately, quietly. The local governor, known for his anti-corruption speeches, receives a small box on his desk. Inside, a folded note and a photograph of the new children's wing, completed 3 months ahead of schedule. The note reads, "For silence, not credit." The governor never mentions it, but the next time Viktor's name surfaces in a provincial inquiry, the file goes missing. He doesn't bribe, he removes resistance. Even law enforcement feels it. There are officers, honest ones, who genuinely believe Viktor is helping more than hurting. Crime is down in districts under his influence. Streets are quiet. Drug wars don't erupt. Businesses pay their taxes. The chaos is managed. And in a way, they're not wrong. Viktor's silence fills a vacuum others try to scream into. He doesn't threaten order. He becomes a kind of shadow order, a parallel system, cleaner than expected, colder than preferred. One evening, during a state dinner, a politician's aide leans in to whisper something about Averin. The official smiles, sips his wine, and says, "If he's mentioned, he's listening, so let's not." Even the Kremlin feels it. Not directly, but as a presence, an understanding. There are figures who speak more softly when they talk about regional control. They don't name names, but their eyes drift east. Viktor doesn't own politicians. He surrounds them, and that's the secret. He doesn't need to sit in power to hold it. He just needs to make sure that anyone who does sit in it is sitting comfortably because of him. Not every whisper stays loyal. Even in a world stitched with silence, threads fray. And for Viktor Averin, betrayal isn't rare. It's inevitable. The test isn't whether it happens. It's how you respond without raising your voice. The first serious fracture comes from inside. A man named Grigory, old crew, old trust, starts carving a side path. Nothing dramatic, just a few under-the-table side deals in Rostov, a little double skimming from customs partners, a few too many drinks in too many places, where Viktor's name is supposed to remain unspoken. At first, Viktor says nothing. He doesn't believe in overreacting. He believes in confirming. One by one, he removes the stepping stones beneath Grigory's feet. A trucking contract dissolves. A courier vanishes. Then a payment gets rerouted, just once. Grigory doesn't even realize he's sinking until his phone stops ringing. Finally, he shows up uninvited at a meeting in Moscow. Tries to explain, stammers something about misunderstandings and old friendships. The room is still. No one even pours tea. Viktor doesn't look at him. He just says to the others, "Keep the table clear. We're expecting someone who matters." Grigory leaves. The next morning, he's on a plane to Cyprus. He won't return. That's punishment in Viktor's world, not violence, erasure. Many people still think betrayal and organized crime leads to gunfire, car bombs, vendettas. But so what do you think? Which hurts more? A bullet? Or becoming a name no one dares repeat? But not all challenges are internal. Rival groups, some young and loud, some seasoned and arrogant, start testing the boundaries of Viktor's silent empire. One crew from Kazan tries to muscle in on a freight hub near Samara, sends muscle, sends messages. Viktor sends no one. Instead, a week later, the crew's primary distributor gets audited. The warehouse lease gets revoked. Their accountant disappears. And the crew leader receives a call, not from Viktor, but from someone in his own ranks who says, "We're out. This isn't a war, this is gravity." The Kazan crew folds. Because Viktor doesn't fight betrayal, he unplugs it. Even when the betrayal comes from people higher up, officials who once cooperated but now flirt with flashier alliances, he stays quiet. No ultimatums, just a recalibration of their environment. Suddenly, they find themselves navigating customs delays, uncooperative staff, or suddenly interested journalists. By the time they realize who's behind the turbulence, it's already subsided, because they've already come back into line. And yet, for all his control, Viktor does feel the weight of certain betrayals. Not emotionally, not visibly, but in how he watches people. Longer, slower, as if listening not just to what they say, but to what they might say later. There's one case, unusual, painful. A young courier named Dennis, ambitious, well-liked, who gets caught in a sting. Not his fault. Bad timing, wrong street. He's taken in. Viktor makes no move. Days pass. Then Dennis is released. No charges filed, a miracle. But when he shows up again, sheepish, apologetic, Viktor just hands him a sealed envelope and says, "Deliver this to the coast." Dennis never comes back. The envelope? It contains a single card with one word: run. No one ever sees Dennis again. And no one ever forgets that even mercy from Viktor is branded with finality. He doesn't need to punish all betrayal. He just needs to outlast it. There's a phrase that floats around the underworld, attributed to a dozen different old-timers, but always whispered when Viktor's name comes up. He forgives like a glacier, slow, inevitable, and you'll never be warm again. In the quiet court of the Quiet Patriarch, silence isn't just golden, it's verdict. To the public, Viktor Averin might as well not exist. There are no glossy photos, no grainy mugshots splashed on front pages, no late-night news segments speculating about his whereabouts. Law enforcement files on him are thin and filled with blanks. Unknown associate, possible link, alleged presence. His invisibility is so deliberate that even other criminals joke that you hear of Viktor, but you never hear him. When he does appear, it's like seeing a shadow in daylight, brief, out of place, and gone before you can confirm it was ever there. There's a famous story from 2003 during a rare gathering of Vory elders in St. Petersburg. The police knew something was happening. Informants whispered about a high-level meet. But when the raid came, they found an empty warehouse. Only the smell of tea remained. No one could confirm if Viktor had been there, but someone swore they saw a man in a gray coat watching from a nearby rooftop as the officers searched, their boots clanging on the empty floor. Viktor's elusiveness isn't accidental, it's designed. He moves like water, through cracks, around corners, into spaces nobody expects. He doesn't take main roads. He uses public trams, old station tunnels, side entrances in markets. One day, he's in Yaroslavl overseeing a shipment. The next, he's spotted, if you can call it that, in a quiet cafe on the edge of Sochi, talking to no one in particular. Many people still think a powerful gangster has to be visible to prove his status. But so, what do you think? Does presence mean power, or does absence make power heavier? There's a lieutenant of his, a grizzled man named Stepan, who once said, "If Viktor sits in a room with 10 men, you might notice him last. But when you remember the meeting, he's the only one you recall clearly." It's true. Viktor doesn't dress like the underworld stereotype. No flashy leather jackets or gold chains. He wears muted suits, gray coats, and cheap black gloves in winter. He doesn't carry a phone. If he needs to send a message, it comes through one of 3 men who know his voice well enough to repeat it word for word, tone included. Law enforcement struggles to pin him down. In the early 2000s, Moscow's Organized Crime Task Force compiles a list of suspected Vory leaders. Viktor's name appears once, then vanishes. An internal note says, "No actionable intel, possible ghost identity." Meanwhile, rival bosses find themselves unnerved. They can't map his habits. He doesn't drink publicly, doesn't frequent clubs or high-stakes games. He has no regular haunts, no pattern to his travels. A man like that is hard to trap, harder to predict. There's a story, possibly myth, of Viktor slipping through a police checkpoint near Kaluga. His car, an old Lada, was stopped and searched. Officers looked at his documents, then waved him through. Later, when they realized who he was, they swore they couldn't recall a single detail about his face. "Like we forgot it on purpose," one officer muttered. That's the kind of presence he cultivates. Not forgettable, not noticeable, just ungraspable. Even his closest men rarely see him unannounced. He calls meetings at odd hours, often in unexpected places. A quiet riverside park at dawn, a shuttered warehouse with only one working light bulb, or a borrowed dacha deep in the woods. And when he leaves, no one is sure which car he took or if he left at all. Viktor believes in something old, something his prison years taught him. If they know where you sleep, they own you. So he moves, constantly. Rumors say he rotates between 5 apartments, none with personal touches, just bare walls, a mattress, and a kettle. His power isn't in being seen, it's in being felt. Because when someone mentions the Quiet Patriarch, it isn't about where he is, it's about where he could be. And that lingering uncertainty, it's sharper than fear. It begins with a glance across a courtyard, a cigarette passed without words, a favor done without explanation. That's how mentorship works in Viktor Averin's world. Not with speeches or declarations, but with example, with presence, with patience so dense it starts to shape the air around it. By the mid-2000s, Viktor's influence has taken root far beyond Moscow. In cities like Saratov, Omsk, and even as far as Vladivostok, young men whisper his name with reverence. But unlike other bosses who flaunt their protégés like prize fighters, Viktor nurtures his like a craftsman, quietly, precisely, and with the understanding that only a few will truly understand the weight of what they're inheriting. He doesn't recruit, he notices. A courier who never asks questions. A bodyguard who steps forward without waiting for instruction. A young smuggler who, when offered too much money too quickly, turns it down and keeps working the old route. These are the ones Viktor calls in for tea. No offers, no praise, just a cup. Maybe a single phrase. Are you ready to be trusted before you understand why? That's his style. His mentorship isn't about elevating someone. It's about exposing them, testing their silence, their stillness, their ability to disappear when needed and reappear exactly when called. Many people still think leadership is about charisma, about making people follow you willingly. But so, what do you think? Could the truest kind of leadership be the kind that doesn't ask for followers, just watchers, listeners, quiet mirrors? The men he mentors don't dress like soldiers. They don't use force unless absolutely necessary. They handle disputes like chessboards, thinking 3 moves ahead. They quote him often, but rarely name him. A favorite line among them becomes, "He says less in a year than most men lie in a day." One of them, Sergei from Irkutsk, once gets into a dangerous entanglement with a Turkish crew. Rather than retaliate, he writes Viktor a letter. Not an email, not a call. A handwritten letter delivered via a trusted channel. Viktor reads it in silence, waits 3 days, sends back a single package, a folded map, and a black chess piece. The bishop, Sergei, understands immediately. He reroutes the smuggling corridor through Belarus. Within weeks, the tension dissolves. No blood, no noise, just understanding. Viktor doesn't just pass on tactics. He passes on tempo. He trains his men to wait, to observe, to act at the precise moment when the other side has run out of certainty. There's an internal saying among his closest circle: the patriarch doesn't raise men. He removes their noise. Even when mentoring, Viktor rarely corrects. He allows mistakes, but never repeats. A protege who bungles a customs deal is sent away, not punished, but reassigned to bookkeeping for 6 months. If the man returns sharper, calmer, more deliberate, he's welcomed back without comment, and those who don't adjust, they disappear. Not forcibly, but from relevance. Viktor simply stops sending for them. And in this world, being ignored by him is worse than being reprimanded. It means you're not trusted with silence. Once, at a gathering of regional lieutenants, someone asks a rare question aloud. Who will take over if he's gone? The room falls still. Then someone, nobody's sure who, answers softly, "If he trained you right, no one will need to." Because that's the legacy Viktor wants. Not statues, not names on marble, not heirs with flashy rings, but echoes, decisions made in his style, judgments passed with his weight, moments of quiet control that outlive the man himself. A younger enforcer once described it best: he doesn't teach us what to do. He teaches us how to stand still when the world is begging us to move. And in a world built on noise, that stillness becomes a revolution. Borders mean little to men like Viktor Averin. Not because he crosses them often, he rarely leaves Russia, but because his influence does, quietly, efficiently, without papers or fanfare. His network, once rooted in prison silence and regional respect, now extends like veins across continents. It begins subtly, first with partnerships in Ukraine and Belarus. These aren't hostile takeovers, they're conversations, quiet ones, a shared bottle of vodka between 2 old-world criminals. A mutual understanding. We both want less chaos, and chaos by the 2000s is everywhere. Globalization hits the underworld hard. Western products flood Eastern markets. Borders open for trade and for contraband. Viktor doesn't resist it. He absorbs it. Slowly. In Odessa, his men begin to appear, not wearing colors, not marking turf. They rent apartments, they observe, and they start solving problems. When a Turkish crew hijacks a shipment, Viktor's people don't retaliate. They simply redirect 5 trucks of supplies meant for that crew's partners. Days later, the Turks return the stolen goods with interest. No blood, no statements, just cause and effect. Many people still think international crime is driven by flashy mafias, gunfights, tattoos, cartel videos. But so what do you think? Can a man become more powerful across borders by simply exporting his silence? Viktor's methods appeal to other syndicates, not because he's friendly, but because he's predictable. In a business built on mistrust, predictability is gold. In Germany, a small Belarusian outfit laundering money through car exports runs into heat. They reach out, quietly. A few months later, a Moscow shell company buys their books and retools them into logistics consulting. The heat vanishes. The business grows. No one knows who owns the paperwork, but every Christmas, a bottle of Armenian brandy arrives at an unmarked building in Moscow. Viktor never signs contracts. He signs arrangements, the kind sealed by favors, reputation, and an unspoken understanding. If you try to cheat me, you won't hear from me again. You'll just feel the absence of luck. In Kazakhstan, he supports a minor air freight route used for both legal goods and misplaced electronics. The man running it once tried to skim fuel costs, until one day his suppliers stopped answering calls. 2 weeks later, he was back at Viktor's door. No scolding, no punishment, just a cup of tea. A long pause, and Viktor's voice. Loyalty returns faster than suspicion. Choose which one travels with you. The route thrived after that, and even farther afield. Dubai, Antwerp, Istanbul. His style of operation begins to whisper its way through docks, customs offices, and unassuming cafes. He never touches these places directly, but his fingerprints, they're on the silence that follows certain decisions. On the way, certain shipments pass inspection. On the hush that falls when a name is mentioned over the phone and the line goes dead for just a second too long. His men speak multiple languages, not fluently, but well enough to say the right words to the right people. But Viktor teaches them that silence is still the strongest dialect. There's a story of one of his lieutenants, Ilya, negotiating with a Serbian group. The conversation grows tense. Voices rise. The Serbs want guarantees. Ilya says nothing for almost a full minute, just looks across the table, waits. Finally, the Serb leader breaks the silence. You're one of Averin's. It isn't a question. Ilya nods once, and the deal is signed. That's Viktor's real passport, recognition without introduction, because in the end, his name crosses borders, even when his body never does. His philosophy, of order through stillness, of dominance without declaration, proves remarkably exportable. He doesn't conquer the world, he whispers into it. If there's one thing Viktor Averin knows better than how to build power, it's how to pay for it. Not in rubles, not in dollars, but in something colder. Sacrifice. He's always known that the cost of his silence isn't measured in how little he says, but in how much he gives up to keep that silence intact. By the late 2000s, Viktor owns nothing in his own name. No houses, no cars, no phones. His existence is a network of rented rooms, borrowed coats, and loyal intermediaries. People ask where he sleeps. The answer is always the same. Where he needs to. But even a man, this still leaves footprints in the snow. Just not the kind most people notice. They're the footprints of a personal life dissolved for the sake of control. Once, long ago, there was someone. A woman. Not a partner. Not officially. Just someone who knew how to sit with him in silence and not ask for anything. She owned a bookshop tucked between two broken lampposts in Izhevsk. She stocked titles he liked. Bulgakov, Babel, translated Camus. He visited once a month, always in the morning. always left before the shop got busy. Then 1 month he didn't come. No message, no reason, just gone. And when her shop burned down 3 years later in a neighborhood skirmish, Viktor didn't rebuild it. He just stood across the street the next morning for an hour, motionless, then left, because love, or even comfort, is a loose thread. And loose threads? They unravel men like him. Many people still think power comes with privilege. Fancy homes, expensive watches, lovers in foreign ports. But so what do you think? What if the true price of control is solitude that no door opens to? His routine is clinical. He wakes before dawn, no matter the city. Drinks tea, always black, no sugar. He reads newspapers in full, front to back, even the parts most men skip. He doesn't take breakfast. He walks, alone, quietly charting each neighborhood he controls like a monarch inspecting a kingdom no one acknowledges. But it's the way he doesn't linger that strikes people. He moves like a man allergic to attachment, to being recognized. Even his rare comforts are disciplined. A particular bakery in Kirov he stops at only once a season. A jazz cassette he plays only when alone. A photograph he keeps folded deep in a coat lining, glimpsed only when he adjusts the buttons. The photograph? No one knows what's on it. Some say it's his mother, others a prison brother long dead. Maybe it's a younger version of himself, before the silence took root. His inner circle respects the boundary. They never ask about his past. They know the rule. If he wanted something remembered, it would already be spoken. There's a moment, unusual and brief, when a young recruit, unsure of the path, dares to ask, "Do you ever regret it?" Viktor, seated near a cracked window in a rented flat overlooking the Volga, doesn't respond immediately. Just sips his tea, watching river barges drift past in the distance. Then finally he says, "Regret doesn't come when you're walking. It waits for you to stop." And that's the truth. He never stops. Not really. Because to stop would mean facing everything he's buried beneath his silence. The people, the names, the years traded like currency for one long, uninterrupted stillness. Some believe he keeps a journal, a small, battered notebook filled with codes and thoughts. But it's never been found. Others think he writes letters he never sends. Lines like, "If I told you the truth, you'd stop listening." Whether those stories are true doesn't matter. What matters is the weight of his absence in the lives he could have had. Because Viktor Averin doesn't just live for the code. He lives without the things that would make him break it. And that kind of life? That's the price you never see on the receipt. At the height of his influence, Viktor Averin doesn't sit on a throne. He doesn't command from behind mirrored glass or wave men forward from a private box seat. He doesn't need to, because by now, his very absence is presence. Across Russia and beyond its aging borders, his name is a kind of quiet currency. You don't say it to boast. You say it so a door opens without a key. You say it to avoid a fight. You say it so someone knows you're not alone, even if you showed up by yourself. This isn't the kind of empire measured by bodyguards or Instagram photos. Viktor doesn't even carry a phone. But in the alleys of Kaliningrad, in the customs booths of Rostov, in the markets of Tbilisi, men defer. Women glance twice. Rival crews back down before plans even finish forming. He controls less than other bosses. But what he does control, he owns completely. There's no flamboyance to it. If you were to see him, gray coat, same boots, quiet breath, you wouldn't turn your head. But if you worked in the underground, you'd feel it. That electric quiet that hums behind every stable deal, every corridor that runs on time, every problem that stays small when it could have grown. And still, Viktor doesn't celebrate. There are no banquets, no ceremonies, no "we made it" moments. His victory is in the stillness that no one can break. Even rival syndicates, once bold, have grown respectful or afraid. The Chechens don't touch his couriers anymore. A Georgian boss once sent him a bottle of wine and a handwritten note that simply read, "We know you see us. Thank you for not blinking." Many people still think a criminal peak is loud. Chains, cigars, girls, flashing lights. But so what do you think? Could the highest form of power be the kind that moves nothing and changes everything? His network is now mostly self-sustaining. Lieutenants operate in synchronized quiet, their orders never written, rarely spoken. Logistics routes function like veins. Businesses pay tribute like taxes. Problems shrink before they can walk. And what does Viktor do now that he's on top? He watches. One late evening, a longtime associate joins him at a rooftop overlooking the snowy streets of Yekaterinburg. Below, traffic crawls. Neon signs flicker. The world moves fast. The associate asks, "You don't enjoy it, do you?" Viktor smokes quietly, then replies, "Enjoyment is a noise. He lives like this. Window to window, watching cities that pulse below him, never quite touching them. He intervenes only when necessary, and even then, briefly, deliberately. He knows the architecture of chaos by heart. He recognizes when a cell in his network begins to rot. He plucks it clean like dead leaves in winter. Without fuss, his rules have become myth. One rumor says he requires every new recruit to sit in silence for an hour, alone in a room, before joining his crew. Another says he can tell if a man will betray him within 30 seconds of conversation. Whether true or not, people believe. And belief in Viktor's world is law. And yet, he's tired, not physically. That's too easy. This is something else. A kind of emotional weathering. Like standing in wind for 20 years without leaning. Do you remember the day he left with the first money? It was nothing. A gesture from a bunkmate in a freezing cell. But from that quiet nod to now, he hasn't stopped moving. Not once. And so, as the sky darkens over a city he doesn't quite live in, Viktor stands by a window. In his hand, a chipped teacup. On his face, nothing new, because he's not interested in what comes next. He's interested in what can be maintained. A quiet rain. A durable stillness. A long hush that reshapes the world without ever being named. Progress never knocks. It barges in, often uninvited, and demands everyone adapt or be left behind. For Viktor Averin, who's built an empire on stillness and analog discipline, the digital age presents a new kind of storm. Not the kind that howls, but the kind that hums through wires and wakes you at 2 a.m. with blinking lights. Cybercrime, cryptocurrency, surveillance tools, facial recognition, all of it unfolds quickly in Russia's underworld as the late 2000s bleed into the 2010s. Young crews begin using encrypted messengers. Deals move from warehouses to Wi-Fi signals. And Viktor? He watches it all without blinking. He doesn't resist the shift outright. He's not foolish, but he's wary. Because noise now moves faster than bullets. And once something is written online, even in the dark parts of the web, it echoes. Viktor's empire was built to endure. The digital world is built to forget. His first confrontation with the shift comes through a bright-eyed recruit named Artyom. Ambitious, tech-savvy, and a little too loud with his keystrokes. Artyom proposes using crypto wallets to ease tribute transfers and automate the laundering system. Viktor listens. Then calmly he asks, "When the machine breaks, who do you look in the eye?" Artyom doesn't answer. The digital upgrade is shelved. Still, Viktor isn't entirely analog. He authorizes limited encryption, paper backups, dual signature drives, private VPNs with physical kill switches. But he refuses anything that doesn't feel human. Trust to him should be measured in breathing and blinking, not bandwidth. Many people still think modernization is necessary for survival. But so what do you think? Can a system rooted in discipline survive without speed? In one case, a rival group installs surveillance tools in a key warehouse Viktor's crew uses. Hidden mics, motion sensors. They want leverage. Viktor's response is quiet. The building is sold the next week. His cargo? Already gone. Moved in the middle of the night using a path through a burned-out tram tunnel no one thought was still accessible. A note is left in the empty space. If you need to record silence, do it somewhere else. That becomes an inside joke among his crew. Recording silence. They use the phrase when someone tries too hard to modernize something that doesn't need changing. But Viktor isn't naive. He understands the value of digital money flows, of VPNs, of burner phones. He authorizes specialists to no more. They handle just enough to keep the Empire breathing in this new world. But even they are required to report in person, with written logs, not cloud drives. Once, when asked why he doesn't allow internal email, Viktor replies, "I trust a man who forgets his pen more than one who memorizes his password." His world isn't immune to change, but it adapts differently, like vines growing around stone rather than uprooting it. He also invests in something old school but effective: handlers, men and women who serve as human proxies for digital transactions. Want to move crypto? You meet Dima. Dima shakes your hand, makes a call, and disappears. You never see Viktor, but the screen lights up green when the transaction completes, and yet he knows the pressure is growing. Young crews are rising with laptops instead of knives. They speak in codes Viktor doesn't understand. They move fast, too fast, and not all of them respect the old ways. One night, a digital syndicate hacks one of Viktor's logistics databases. Nothing major, just delivery schedules. But it's an offense. Rather than retaliate with firewalls or counterhacks, Viktor sends a flash drive in an envelope. Inside, a single sound file. The sound? A recording of the hacker's own voice from a phone call 2 months prior in which he mocks Viktor. The next day, the hacker posts a public apology on an encrypted forum. That's how Viktor handles technology. With memory, with fear, with consequence. Because even when the world speaks in ones and zeros, silence still carries weight. And Viktor Averin? He remains a man of analog gravity in a world obsessed with speed. Power rarely fades without a fight. And even the quietest empires eventually find themselves tested, not by the predictable enemies, but by the familiar ones. Rivals who once made peace, who once bowed their heads, start straightening their backs. And when they do, Viktor Averin doesn't panic. He listens. It begins with whispers from the Urals. A group that used to pay tribute now delays their payments. A minor courier route gets rerouted, slightly, but enough to raise suspicion. Then, in Samara, a longtime partner starts taking meetings with outsiders, loud ones, foreigners, flashy men with fast money and no respect for old rules. Viktor doesn't react immediately. He lets the tension spread, lets it reveal who's loyal and who's restless, like a physician reading a pulse before diagnosis. Some say he disappears for 10 days during this period, holed up in a dacha with nothing but a pen and a stack of maps. When he returns, he doesn't summon anyone. He simply begins to shift pieces. The first response is almost invisible. A rival's driver is arrested at a customs stop. The paperwork is flawless. No trail back to Viktor. The driver spends 6 weeks detained, loses his license. The operation stutters. Next, a city council in Perm passes a zoning change that inconveniently redirects freight traffic, except for Viktor's partners, whose logistics offices just happen to fall outside the new restricted corridor. And then, without warning, an influential figure from the rival crew vanishes. Not from violence, from disinterest. Rumor has it he asked for Viktor's protection. No one can confirm this. But the next week, the rival crew's accounts are frozen and their informants go quiet. Many people still think gangland rivalries erupt in a single night. A betrayal, a shootout, a war. But so what do you think? Could the most dangerous battles be the ones you never know were fought until they're over? There's one moment, though, where things nearly break. A splinter crew, young, impatient, strikes out in Kaluga. They hijack a truck under Viktor's protection. They don't realize what they've done until it's too late. 3 nights later, a fire consumes their warehouse. Arson? Maybe. But no one claims it. And a day after that, an unmarked car delivers a stack of black and white photographs to the crew's new headquarters. The photos are surveillance shots of them, their homes, their routes to school with their children. No notes, no threats, just images, just silence. The crew disbands within a week. That's Viktor's way. He doesn't escalate. He reminds. Even among his own circle, tensions rise. Some of his men push for stronger shows of force, more muscle, more message sending. Viktor listens, then says quietly, "A shadow doesn't need to shout to prove it's there. It just needs the sun." And that silences the room. But this era marks a shift. It's the first time Viktor's stability feels less like destiny and more like a negotiation. The world is changing, faster, louder, and less interested in tradition. He watches younger factions form alliances with reckless outfits, flashy, short-lived, profit-driven. To many of them, Viktor is a relic, an elder with too much patience, and yet, they still check before crossing his lines. They still lower their voices when his name surfaces, because for all his supposed obsolescence, no one knows how to make him disappear. And perhaps more importantly, no one knows what happens if he chooses not to. In a rare conversation with an old associate, one of the last remaining Vory elders, Viktor sips tea and says, "They think they want my silence to end. They don't know that's the only thing keeping their world in place." The elder nods, because even if rivals rise, even if loyalty is tested, even if the streets begin to hum with new names, one truth remains. Quiet power doesn't announce its return. It just never left. Viktor Averin sits in a windowless room with faded wallpaper and a radio that hasn't changed stations in 6 years. Outside, Russia keeps evolving. New leaders, new laws, new borders of what's tolerated and what's punished. But inside this room, the rules remain unchanged. The silence holds. Still, the walls are thinner now. Pressure is building, not from enemies, but from the world itself. Laws have sharpened. Surveillance has improved. And the very code that Viktor built his life around, the sacred traditions of the Vory zakone, is beginning to fray at the edges. It starts with questions. Younger members ask why they can't own property, why they can't marry, have families, post anonymous photographs of their vacations on encrypted forums. They want to honor the code, but they want to live too. And Viktor? He listens, always, but he does not bend. The Vory code is strict. No cooperation with the state, no pursuit of personal wealth, no emotional attachments. For Viktor, it isn't just discipline, it's identity. Without it, he's not a boss. He's just another man playing criminal. So when one of his protégés, a promising young operator from Novosibirsk, announces his engagement, Viktor calls him in. They sit. The tea is bitter. The silence is longer than usual. Finally, Viktor says, "You've chosen a different oath. That's not betrayal. It's departure." The young man nods. Leaves. He's not punished. He's just excluded. That's Viktor's way. There are no executions, just erasures. But the tension lingers. The code feels heavier now, like a coat stitched in another century. Younger men admire Viktor, but from a distance. Like a statue they're not sure belongs in the plaza anymore. Many people still think tradition is strength. But so what do you think? Can something sacred become obsolete and still be worthy? Viktor doesn't ask those questions out loud. He lives the answers. He continues to refuse phones, to travel under borrowed names, to observe loyalty in gestures, not gifts. His apartment is still bare. His shoes still shine with the same polish he used in prison 30 years ago. Yet he knows the shift is real. At a rare gathering of Senior Vory, the conversation turns to reforms. One man suggests legalizing certain aspects of their network, turning it into a political movement even. Viktor doesn't speak until the end. Then with absolute calm he says, "If we become what they can understand, we lose what they fear." And that ends the conversation, but his stance doesn't go unchallenged. A younger faction in St. Petersburg begins flaunting wealth, cars, champagne, mistresses. They post coded messages online, half mocking the old guard. They refer to Viktor as the museum. Viktor doesn't retaliate. Instead, he arranges a quiet sit-down with their leader, a man named Kirill. They meet in a cold storage facility. No weapons, no entourage, just a table, a metal thermos, and the sound of humming refrigeration. Viktor speaks first. A code doesn't protect you from jail. It protects you from becoming just another man with money. Kirill scoffs. Times change. Viktor nods, then slides over a folder, photos, documents, transaction records, all of Kirill's careless movements laid bare. He says nothing more, just rises and leaves. Kirill disappears from public life 2 weeks later, voluntarily. The rest of his crew returns to silence, because even in a changing world, some men are still fluent in the original language of consequence. And Viktor? He isn't afraid of change. He's afraid of erosion, of values fading so slowly that you don't notice until they're gone. His code remains unbroken, but he carries its weight more alone than ever. Legacy is a strange word in Viktor Averin's world. It implies something you leave behind, something finished. But Viktor isn't finished. He simply recedes, like a tide that never announces its departure. By now, the men who carry his name forward weren't born when he first walked out of that prison camp in the 80s. They know the legend, the lines of his face from secondhand sketches, the rules of his silence. But they don't know him. Not truly. And yet, every decision they make bears his fingerprint. His circle has changed. The old lieutenants, Stepan, Vadim, even the quiet courier Mikhail, have either faded into retirement or vanished into roles too subtle for newspapers. In their place rise a newer generation, men trained in his methods, but shaped by a faster, brighter, more fragile world. These aren't brutes. They're tacticians, economists, psychologists, men who speak 5 languages and know how to smile without promising anything. They don't call themselves Vory. Not all of them, anyway. Some prefer advisors. Others operate under legal umbrellas, logistics consultants, international brokers, asset realignment firms. But when pressed, when quieted, they all admit the same thing. We come from him. Viktor doesn't name a successor. He never would. The code isn't a monarchy. It's a migration, an instinct that finds new hosts. Still, there are signs he watches. A junior operator once handles a debt dispute in perm with brutal efficiency. Too brutal. The debtor ends up hospitalized. No warning, no discretion. The young man, proud, expects praise. Instead, he receives a letter, unmarked. Inside, a page torn from a chess manual. The passage describes the concept of zugzwang, a position where every possible move only worsens your situation. Nothing else is written. The operator adjusts his methods after that. Quietly, many people still think legacy is a statue or a name carved into stone. But so what do you think? Can legacy be a correction written in silence, read by no one but understood by all? His family, if it can be called that, is scattered. Some loyal, some less so. There are rumors of a nephew working in customs, a niece studying law in Warsaw. None confirmed. Viktor doesn't speak of blood. He speaks of continuity. Once, an ambitious young man tries to impress him by reciting part of the Vory code from memory. Viktor stops him midway, says, "If it can be memorized, it can be misused. If it can be felt, it can be passed." He doesn't hold meetings anymore, not in person, not even by proxy. He sends messages through presence, through approvals implied in action, through things not undone. In one case, two crews argue over a disputed shipment corridor in the Caucasus. Tensions rise, old instincts bubble. Everyone expects Viktor to intervene. He doesn't. Instead, a mutual contact receives a small wooden box. Inside is a broken scale, one side weighted, the other not. A metaphor, of course, but also an instruction. Within days, the crews settle, on neutral terms, because even without a voice, Viktor still orchestrates balance. Some men age out of relevance. Viktor simply drifts out of reach, like a constellation still visible, but farther than before. And yet, when the new generation faces an impasse, when silence is needed, when pressure outweighs reason, they still say it. What would the Patriarch do? They don't always agree on the answer, but the question itself, that's the legacy. And Viktor? He watches, doesn't direct, doesn't scold, just observes how his quiet rhythm lives on, how his style of not intervening becomes its own form of control. Because in the end, a true legacy doesn't need acknowledgement. It moves in the breath before a decision. It's the silence that settles after a room empties. It's what stays long after the man is gone. Every man has a line he swore never to cross, until survival drags his feet just far enough over it. For decades, Viktor Averin stood firm, never talked to the state, never made a deal with law enforcement, never cooperated, not even to avoid a war. That was the code. The wall. The final line between being a Vory and being a traitor in disguise. But as the 2010s sharpened their teeth, even the firmest lines began to blur. The whispers started quietly. A prosecutor in Sverdlovsk, known for precision raids, suddenly shelved a case involving a shell company under Viktor's shadow. No announcement, no explanation. Just silence. Then a customs officer in Vladikavkaz, notorious for harassment, transferred without warning days after pulling aside one of Viktor's shipments. Coincidence? Hardly. Many believe Viktor started negotiating, not loudly, not in the open, but in corridors, through intermediaries, brokers who didn't wear uniforms but had lunch with people who did, deals crafted in fog, where no one shook hands but everyone left with dry palms. But Viktor himself, he never admits to it. He continues to walk with his hands in his pockets, his voice low, his eyes heavy. When asked, indirectly about cooperation, he only says, I do not make friends, I make quiet. Yet something has shifted. The edges of his empire grow more curated. Problems vanish faster. Investigations stop before they start. Rumors circulate that certain law enforcement units are strategically blind to his operations. He's not giving information, he's giving permission. Many people still think that working with the state is betrayal. But so what do you think? Can survival reshape morality? Or does it just reveal what a man always knew he'd eventually do? One particular arrangement stands out. A regional commander in the FSB is known to have gambling debts. Large ones. Suddenly, a small casino operation under Viktor's umbrella expands. Quietly, discreetly, no signage. But the commander's debts vanish. In return, Viktor's associates no longer get flagged when they pass through Domodedovo Airport. It's not a bribe, it's not extortion, it's not friendship, it's logistics. His lieutenants understand, most accept it, but a few, especially the older ones, look at him differently now. One, a man called Arslan, speaks up. You taught us the code doesn't bend. Viktor looks at him, long and quiet, then says, I taught you the code doesn't break. Bending is how it survives. And there it is, the subtle shift, the quiet evolution from rigidity to resilient pragmatism. He's still not a collaborator. He would never sell out one of his own. But he's also no longer above buying time, buying space, buying oxygen in a system that crushes everyone who tries to breathe too loudly. There's one story, never confirmed, of Viktor arranging a truce between two rival outfits on behalf of a state agency trying to avoid a media scandal. The deal was inked over tea and bread in a village no one can find on Google Maps. All parties left satisfied, no headlines followed, because that's Viktor's role now. Not enforcer, not ruler, but interpreter between worlds. He speaks for silence, and in doing so, even the people who once hunted him begin to rely on him. A junior anti-corruption officer, fresh and idealistic, once vowed to bring down the silent old guard. 2 years later, he transferred departments. Asked why, he simply said, You can't investigate someone who isn't on any list but is still in every room. Viktor watches this all unfold, says nothing, plans accordingly, because cooperation, like every word he's ever chosen, only matters when it's used sparingly. Some men die for money, some for pride, others quietly for loyalty, paid in full with no applause and no gravestone. In Viktor Averin's orbit, loyalty is not a virtue. It's a requirement, the tax for belonging to his world. And over time, the cost has piled up, not in gold or territory, but in names erased from memory and footsteps that never return. There's Ruslan, his oldest enforcer, the one who used to crack knuckles just by folding his hands. In 2008, Ruslan disappears during a conflict near the Baltic coast. No body found, no obituary. But for weeks after, Viktor's men operate with more precision than ever, almost like they're honoring something left unfinished. Then there's Yana, a fixer in Novosibirsk. Unassuming, brilliant, sharp as broken glass. She kept Viktor's supply chain clean for years, moving parts no one noticed. One day, she gets caught in the crossfire of a street-level deal gone wrong. Viktor doesn't attend her funeral, doesn't send flowers. He simply visits the warehouse where she used to work, stands in the cold, and stays there until dusk. By the time he leaves, no one else dares set foot in that building again. Many people still think sacrifice is dramatic. But so what do you think? Could the quiet kind, the unnoticed, unrewarded, unspoken, carry more weight than all the bullets in the world? His men know what's expected. Viktor never gives speeches about devotion. He doesn't promise safety. But if you stand by him, you're absorbed into his stillness. And if you fall, he doesn't mourn loudly. He just makes sure your name doesn't disappear where it matters. One courier once ran 4 cities in 5 days, carrying documents that could have sunk an entire distribution ring. No hotels. No rest. On the final leg, the man collapsed at a checkpoint. Dehydrated. Disoriented. Viktor paid for his recovery. Paid for his mother's rent. Paid for his silence. When asked why, he said, "He walked until it hurt. That's a language I respect." There's no wall of remembrance in Viktor's network. No list of the fallen. But among his inner circle, names are remembered in how tea is poured, which music is played, which routes are avoided not because they're dangerous, but because someone once didn't come back from them. Even betrayal can be forgiven. Weakness, too. But abandoning the code, that's the true death. One man tried. A lieutenant named Pavel. Trusted. Efficient. Then suddenly gone. Rumors of a new life in Cyprus, of a new crew, of whispering state agents. A year later, Viktor walks into a dry cleaner he rarely visits. Picks up a folded coat that hadn't been claimed in months. Inside one of the pockets, a photograph, a chess piece, and a single handwritten note. No more pawns. Viktor never mentions the name again, but the message is clear. You leave loyalty behind, and you leave your identity with it. To Viktor, the weight of sacrifice isn't in what's lost. It's in what must be carried after. The silence deepens, the circle tightens, and the men who remain know exactly what they're a part of. No medals, no praise, just the privilege of continuing. There's a phrase whispered among the inner crew whenever someone disappears for the cause. He went with his eyes open. And in this world, there's no higher honor. Power has a way of seeping into places it wasn't invited. It drips between bricks, seeps through polite conversation, slips beneath the floorboards of normal life. By the mid-2010s, Viktor Averin's influence has grown so quietly, so methodically, that it begins reaching into corners untouched by crime, or at least untouched visibly. You see it in the way people speak, not criminals, civilians. A shopkeeper in Yekaterinburg closes early out of respect. A logistics manager in Kazan insists on checking with the silent office before approving a new partnership. No one says Viktor's name, but everyone knows what not to say and who not to ignore. That's when you know you've stepped beyond crime. You've stepped into culture. There's a professor at a second-tier university who includes Viktor's network in a course on modern informal economies. She calls it ambient structure, a system that functions like weather, unseen, felt, prepared for. She writes a paper. The paper disappears. Not because Viktor suppressed it. He didn't need to. The dean simply redirected her syllabus. That's power. Many people still think criminal influence ends at threats and favors. But so what do you think? What if it lingers in silence, gently rearranging what people think is normal? The truth is, by now, Viktor Averin has shaped more than the underworld. He's shaped behavior. A mid-level contractor working for a government transport agency receives a package one day. Perfectly ordinary. No return address. Inside, a flash drive and a bottle of mineral water. The drive contains photos, nothing compromising, just patterns, truck routes, inventory anomalies, idle vehicles. The message? We notice what you think no one sees. The contractor quits. His replacement is more careful. And that's the secret behind Viktor's reach. He doesn't own the courts, or the mayors, or the newspapers. But his handprint hovers above how people act, even when he's not in the room. Especially then. Once, An artist in Nizhny Tagil painted a mural that vaguely resembled Viktor, a gray-coated figure watching over a shadowy city. It wasn't labeled, just appeared overnight. A week later, the building was quietly sold, the mural painted over. The artist was never threatened, but he never painted again. Some say he moved to Georgia. Others say he started teaching children. Viktor's name appears nowhere. And yet, among a new class of entrepreneurs, young men with suitcases and startups and fast Russian, his principles echo. They speak of quiet leverage, of implied control. Some even reference the Patriarch model in pitch decks, not knowing they're borrowing from a man who would never approve of being summarized. His rules, unwritten, become norms. Don't speak when silence will get you further. Don't rush when patience will cost them more. Don't be noticed if you don't need to be remembered. And those principles bleed into the cities he's touched. Even architecture seems to shift. Windowless warehouses on side streets, cafes with no signs, offices that look empty but buzz with activity at strange hours. It's not fear, it's gravity. People walk straighter, listen harder, avoid unnecessary noise. One urban planner, reviewing traffic flow near Viktor's old neighborhood, notes an unusual pattern. Deliveries always arrive between 2:30 and 3:15 p.m. precisely. Never earlier, never later. No reason, no formal rule. But everyone respects the rhythm. Why? She asks. A driver shrugs. It's just how it is. Viktor's touch isn't loud. It doesn't stain. It stains what it doesn't touch. And that absence becomes a kind of frame, one that the whole city begins to orient around. Because when power doesn't demand to be seen, it becomes the thing you don't know how to live without. Even stillness erodes. By the late 2010s, the foundations Viktor Averin built begin to tremble. Not from betrayal or incompetence, but from time itself. Systems designed for shadows begin to suffer from exposure. Younger men make faster moves. Authorities, once complacent, grow hungry. Rivals no longer kneel before the old code. They tiptoe past it, armed with smartphones and wiretaps. Viktor doesn't panic. He recognizes the shift. He's felt it coming like distant thunder through the soles of his shoes. The signs are small at first. A trusted lieutenant delays a report twice. A customs route once considered safe now demands extra payment. A shell company in Smolensk is flagged for audit, despite 3 years of silence. None of these incidents are fatal. But taken together, they tell the same story. Something has changed. And then there's the silence that doesn't feel quite right anymore. For decades, Viktor's power rested on the principle that silence itself was enough to direct, to punish, to warn. But lately, his silence is met not with fear, but with noise, pushback, testing, whispered doubts. A new generation of crime bosses begins to rise. Slick, media literate, crypto-fueled. They build brands instead of reputations. Some even mock the old ways in encrypted group chats, as if Viktor were a fairy tale their fathers used to threaten them with. One post goes viral, internally. The Patriarch is a ghost. Try tagging him. Viktor never responds. But within days, the author of that post is arrested for tax fraud. No fingerprints, no accusations, just a quietly tipped scale. Still, Viktor knows this isn't like before. He's not punishing disrespect. He's managing irrelevance. Many people still think decline comes like a storm. Fast, violent, unmistakable. But so what do you think? What if it comes like fog, slow, soft, and so quiet you only realize you're lost when the path is gone? His network adjusts. Logistics become more careful. Meetings fewer. Orders even more cryptic. But even among his most trusted men, there's a hesitation. A wondering, How long can this last? One night, Viktor visits an old cafe, one of his last familiar haunts. The waitress, new and bright-eyed, doesn't recognize him, calls him grandfather, offers him herbal tea with too much honey. He smiles politely, drinks it anyway. No one bows. No one leans in to whisper. For the first time in years, Viktor walks out of a room without changing it. That night, he returns to his flat. Bare walls, one chair, one window. He stands in the silence, listening, not to threats, to absence. The silence now feels different. Not deliberate, not powerful, just empty. Do you remember the day he left with the first money? That moment when the cold air hit his lungs and the door clanged shut behind him? That was the start of something. But this feels like something else entirely. Even his enemies begin to forget why they feared him. New syndicates rise without seeking his blessing. His name is no longer spoken with caution, just curiosity. And to many, that's worse than death. But Viktor doesn't mourn the change. He observes it. He doesn't ask, "Why am I being forgotten?" He asks, "Did I make the silence strong enough to stand without me?" Because that's the final test of quiet power. Not whether it commands when present, but whether it endures when absent. And now the weight shifts, from leadership to legacy, from action to echo, from empire to memory. The world doesn't hate him. It doesn't celebrate him. It just starts to move without checking which way he's facing. And he lets it, because a true patriarch doesn't need the world to pause for him. He only needs it to remember that it once did. There are moments, rare and uninvited, when even the most disciplined man glances inward, when the past doesn't knock, but simply walks in and sits beside him. Viktor Averin, once the quiet axis around which entire cities turned, now finds himself in such moments more often. He doesn't call them regrets. He would never use that word. But sometimes, late at night, in a borrowed flat with a view of some rusted skyline, he thinks about the weight of all he chose not to have. He doesn't sleep much anymore. Not because of fear. He abandoned fear decades ago. But because dreams no longer offer escape. They offer echoes. A voice he barely remembers. The smell of prison soap. The crack of frost under his boots. A laugh from a woman who never asked him what he did. He sits at his window with a cup of tea gone cold, watching headlights bend around corners like time trying to escape memory. Somewhere, in a nightclub he's never seen, a young man says his name like a question. And Viktor? He says nothing. There was a time when silence was armor. Now it's the room. He still receives messages, thin, coded, respectful. His advice is sought occasionally. A signature is mimicked. A phrase is repeated. But fewer men know what the words meant to him. They use them like tools, not truths. Many people still think reflection comes when a man feels guilt. But so what do you think? Can a man look back, not because he's sorry, but because he's finally far enough away to see the shape of it all? He remembers Ruslan, standing guard at a warehouse entrance on a foggy night. He remembers Yana, hunched over balance sheets she didn't have to balance. He remembers the weight of Grigori's silence before betrayal. These are the details that remain. Not triumphs. People, and in a way, they are the triumphs. Not for glory, but for stillness maintained in a world built to unravel. There's a drawer he rarely opens. Inside, a chessboard missing one pawn. A folded receipt from a bakery that closed in '03. A single photograph, the same one no one's ever seen. He doesn't look at it. He just checks that it's still there. Because Viktor Averin, for all his calculation, is still a man. And every man carries one thing He never showed the world. One crack in the quiet. He doesn't write memoirs, doesn't leave notes. But if he did, it would say something like, "Everything I protected cost me what I never allowed myself to want." And maybe that's the deal he made. To hold still so others could move. To be the anchor so others could drift. To become the ghost so others wouldn't need to haunt their own names. One evening, in a cafe where no one knows him, a child drops a toy. Viktor picks it up, hands it back without a word. The child thanks him. The parent smiles. He nods. For a moment, the world forgets who he was. And for the first time in years, maybe decades, he doesn't mind, because the best silence doesn't echo. It simply waits until it's no longer needed. By the time Viktor Averin begins to fade from the last pages of the underworld's daily conversation, he's no longer expected to appear in person. His name remains, but as a reference, a parable, a structure that explains why some doors stay locked and others open silently. No one announces his retirement. There is no farewell meeting, no candlelit toast. He doesn't vanish. He simply stops arriving. His last confirmed sighting, if it can be called that, is at a train platform outside Kazan. Early morning, a man in a gray coat reading a book with no title on the spine. He boards a train going west. That's all. The conductor doesn't recall anything strange. The security cameras were undergoing maintenance that week. He becomes a myth again, but the machine continues. Across the cities he once touched, silence remains policy. Deals still happen without signatures. Couriers still speak in nods. Logistics routes still adjust themselves in response to pressure no one names. His protégés, some who never met him, begin quoting him by instinct, like they've always known what he would have said, be the breath they didn't know they were holding. If you must arrive already forgiven. Loyalty doesn't need a signal, and perhaps that's his greatest victory. He no longer needs to exist in the world to shape how it behaves. The Vory code, though battered, still pulses beneath the pavement. Not because of law, not because of fear, but because of example. Many people still think legacy is secured by succession. But so what do you think? Can legacy be the shape left behind when the noise is gone? His last true loyalist, an old man who sweeps floors in a warehouse in Ufa, once said to a passing stranger, "We don't need him to come back. We need to remember how quiet got us here." And so they do. One day, years after Viktor's name stopped moving papers or pausing phone calls, a young smuggler in Rostov finds himself cornered in a deal gone bad. No weapons, no options, just silence. Instead of panicking, he remembers the stories, the stillness. He sits down, says nothing, lets the moment cool like tea gone untouched. The other man, larger, louder, ready to escalate, pauses, blinks. "You're one of his," he says. The smuggler says nothing, and the deal resets. Because even in absence, Viktor Averin negotiates, and somewhere far away, on a bench in a town with no memory of him, he sits beneath a tree, with wind rustling through old leaves, a cup of tea in hand. No guards, no briefcase, just stillness. The world continues, but part of it, just the quietest part, moves in rhythm with a man no longer present, but never truly gone. So now, as Viktor's shadow settles over the end of our journey, let your thoughts slow. Let the movement of the world grow softer, as if walking on velvet, as if the silence itself has chosen to stay a little longer beside you. No need to carry every name, every rule, every moment of stillness that wrapped around this man's life. Let it all loosen now. like the last breath before sleep. Because in the end, Viktor Averin's greatest lesson wasn't control. It was release. Let go of noise. Let go of tension. Let the quiet guide you into that place beyond questions, beyond structure, the kind of stillness that watches over you, even when you don't know it's there. Sweet dreams.